6:45. Okay. Wow. We're going to let it.
We're
tag team.
Yeah.
We're going to stay.
Enrique, you think WD-40 would make a difference on this? A little spit? Yeah. All right. I think we have affiliated governments. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I do believe we have an update. We asked earlier about the staff could provide some additional information on flow lines and other states' work. So take a few minutes and explain that, what you found out.
Yes, thank
Please.
you, Commissioner. A question earlier this morning, or statement was made that Wyoming maps flow lines. We've been able to contact legal counsel to the Oil and Gas Commission in the state of Wyoming, and counsel to the commission there has confirmed that in fact Wyoming does not map flow lines. The maps that they provide online relate to transmission lines that are throughout the state. With respect to Texas, there are big comments also that Texas maps flow lines. And in fact, they do not. We've confirmed that the regulatory agency that oversees flow lines and gathering lines in Texas, unlike in Colorado, they have jurisdiction over oil and gas lines. And so the maps that are provided in Texas relate to oil, gathering lines for natural gas, and of course transmission lines, large transmission lines across the state. So neither Texas nor Wyoming actually map flow lines.
And to clarify, when you say transmission lines, you're not talking about electricity.
That is correct.
So these would be interstate?
Interstate going into interstate.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, now we'll proceed.
Could we get a clarification on time on this part? I think
Yes.
we received a couple of minutes.
NWCCOG gave you their remainder, so you have 27 minutes, 51 seconds.
And we'd like to reserve 8 minutes of that for closing cross-examination.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. Again, Jeff Robbins, I'm here as counsel for the City of Lafayette. The affiliated local governments is also comprised of Boulder County as well as Longmont, Colorado. We have before you 4 witnesses today. First is Kim Sanchez. She's the Chief Planner and the LGD for Boulder County, Colorado. Second, we have Mike Chard. He is the Director of Boulder County's Office of Emergency Management. Third, we have Fire Chief Dave Friedel. He is the Lafayette City Fire Chief. And then finally, we have Karen Westover. She's the Director of Planning and Building and the LGD for the City of Lafayette. They're going to present the testimony. I think they need to be sworn in to start.
Just for clarification, what your witnesses are here to present are just what they'd like to see in the rules?
Yes, they're going to provide perspective and comments on certain of the rules.
Okay. So we don't need to swear them in then. So go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Kim Sanchez, Chief Planner and Local Government Designee for Boulder County. Here speaking on behalf of the affiliated local government group, which, as Jeff mentioned, is comprised of Boulder County, Longmont, and Lafayette. We've teamed up as a party to provide joint comments to you today for this rulemaking. We've also coordinated with the City and County of Broomfield, the City of Brighton, and the City of Thornton on the issues that are common amongst our jurisdictions. As such, we've prepared a reference sheet with the amendments that we find necessary to the rules that was submitted as an exhibit to you. And I specifically will be speaking to numbers 8, 9, and 10 on that punch list today. Following our presentation, the City and County of Broomfield will be speaking to 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 on that punch list. The first issue that we wanted to talk about today is the need for the mapping of these pipelines. A comprehensive and accurate map showing the locations of all pipelines of any type is critical, and it's critical for those that are involved in land use planning and emergency response, particularly local governments and public safety responders. Enhancement of the 811 or one call system is not and cannot be a substitute for comprehensive mapping database, and is an overly simplistic way to address this issue. And the request that you're hearing from people today to provide information regarding the location of lines. The underground network of infrastructure associated with oil and gas facilities needs to be comprehensively inventoried and mapped, and this system should be hosted by COGCC, the regulator of oil and gas facilities in the state, with the data supplied by operators. I think from what I've heard today and the questions and some of the dialogue that's taken place, there seems to be a misunderstanding or perhaps a lack of understanding about what 811 actually does. Or maybe perhaps it's a mismatch about what local governments and the public seem to be asking for with these rules. I guess I had a question also. Is anyone from 811 here? Do we have somebody to respond directly to what 811 does? Does the commission have a full understanding of what Tier 1 membership means and what we're asking 811 to be doing? Because if we're going to be making a decision about these rules and pushing the mapping and location issue onto them, I really hope that we do have a full comprehensive understanding of what their ability to do in practice is and what their expectations are as we're discussing today. Our understanding of it is that 811 sends relevant operators out to a property to actually locate lines in connection with a specific excavation project. And they have no way of doing that across a large area without there being a specific project. So what we're asking for isn't really just about calling before you dig at a time when someone is ready to break ground. It's about having information about the lines that are underground, accessible to us early on so that people can plan effectively. It's about equipping planners like myself and property owners with information to make safe, wise, and informed decisions far before they're ready to dig, far before any shovel is moving dirt. And it's also to provide that information to help us plan and potentially develop in areas, or maybe even help influence an individual property owner from whether or not they want to buy or relocate in that particular area. Planning as a discipline is about considering where things are: environmental resources, wildlife, residences, natural areas, hazards, both man-made and natural hazards, infrastructure, etc. We take that information, evaluate, and assess the impacts to and from those things in order to locate new things: houses, businesses, parks, farming operations, anything accordingly. It also helps us figure out where we want to preserve valuable spaces, as we've done with much of our land in Boulder County. The 811 system does not maintain a database for the locations of all pipelines and is not set up to provide pipeline locations for a broad area, which is what local governments in particular are interested in having access to. You're going to hear from industry today likely that it will be a burden to locate these lines, that it's going to be difficult to locate pre-existing lines, and that a comprehensive database is not necessary, nor is it possible. We understand that creating and maintaining a comprehensive mapping program is no small task for COGCC to take on, but it's time for this department to start doing things better and to improve the systems that are in place and the information that you make transparent and available to the public. All of the reasons you may hear from industry as to why this can't be done is exactly why you should do this. We need to know this information. Form 44s and registering starting and endpoints for lines and recording easements, I think, were attempts by staff to address identifying locations and sharing that information with local governments. But as Commissioner Boygan pointed out earlier, they don't quite get us there. Instead, COGCC needs to take on the responsibility of regulating oil and gas development seriously, which involves knowing where everything related to those oil and gas facilities that you're permitting is, instead of passing this responsibility on to 811. We'd like to see COGCC catalog and map this information. There are hundreds of GIS graduates that graduate from our universities locally every year. I'm sure we can get help for this mapping exercise. But we'd like to see this information be cataloged and mapped and allow local governments to have access to it so we can better plan, so we can operate on our lands accordingly, and so we can use this information to make better informed decisions, and as some of our expert witnesses will speak to next, to help respond in the context of public safety.
Thank you, Kim. Mike Chart, Director of Boulder Office Emergency Management, and I'll be commenting related to flow line mapping and the importance of developing a database for community safety and preparedness. But first off, I'd like to give you a little bit about what emergency management actually does. Most people know what fire and police do, but I show up in suits, not uniforms. And our role in public safety is also around planning and response. Emergency management mission for Boulder Office Emergency Management is that we plan, coordinate, support a wide range of activities to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters and large-scale emergencies, while also reducing vulnerabilities to hazards. Emergency management everywhere in our great state seeks to promote safer, less vulnerable communities with the capacity to cope with hazards and disasters. These mission sets we take the 4 phases of emergency management, which are universally applied, which is in mitigation, protection, prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. So how does emergency or should emergency management work specifically to address oil and gas safety and preparedness within their community? The first step that we take is to perform a hazard identification risk analysis. This is called a HIRA, which identifies hazards and evaluates risks and assists with defining risk tolerance. A HIRA typically addresses 3 main risk questions. First being the hazard, what can go wrong? 2, the consequences, how bad could this actually be? And then finally, likelihood, how often might it happen? The second step is to determine hazard location and areas and geolocate their presence for emergency and disaster planning. Specific impacts can be determined by modeling a hazardous situation based on size, location, and taking into effect influencing factors such as quantity, form, weather, topography, population density. The models provide the best planning data because they are based on real-world situations and predictable impacts on life, property, and infrastructure. The third stage is to engage the community with information acquired through this HIRA process and the hazard scenario planning, and it creates benefits by sharing information with the community. One of the benefits are that they will understand the local hazards, how they will be impacted in the area. They'll also be better educated residents, and this also means that they will be better prepared and more likely they will know the signs when something is wrong, how to report the emergency, receive emergency messages, and what actions to take that will protect their health and prevent loss of life. And most importantly, the most effective community preparedness efforts build around the community's expectations and desires, and their expectations to know what's around them. Why can emergency management not complete this mission currently? The reason is simple. If there's not reliable, available information related to the oil and gas activity, specifically flow line mapping, there's no way to know where the hazard is located, what type of hazard is present, and what impact properties can be expected: toxicity, flammability, and form, liquid or gas. In Boulder County, our 2 greatest natural hazards are wildfire and flash flooding. We currently have GIS mapping indicating high wildfire danger in flash flood prone areas. I use this mapping to focus mitigation efforts, plan operationally, and focus our preparedness programs. In Boulder County, our top 2 human-caused hazards are hazardous materials releases and cyber attacks. We're working on both to improve our understanding of the problem, increase data on location, and vulnerabilities to have a tighter variance on predicting where, how, and what will happen when these events occur. Colorado 811 is a great resource for locating utilities for the homeowner or professional excavating companies. It does not provide sufficient levels of information or GIS data for emergency planning activities. If emergency managers have access to flow line data, programs, planning activities can be developed to assist with community planning and risk management, community preparedness, and planning for emergency or disaster response. COGCC has the ability to greatly assist emergency managers across our state developing, implementing, and maintaining planning efforts that can save lives and communities. With the right rules in place that make flow line mapping accessible, transparent, and current, and also required, emergency management can complete this mission. I'd like to add one piece to this because I've been listening to questions today. What specifically do we need in the rulemaking? We need rules that require and make available flow line mapping sufficient to perform emergency planning. Currently, I do not see them in the rules. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is David Fidel, again, I'm the Fire Chief for the City of Lafayette. I'm prepared to just a short statement. City of Lafayette Fire Department is the response agency for any emergency in and around the City of Lafayette. We're very capable of all hazards department, planning for structural fires, motor vehicle accidents, emergency medical calls, and hazardous materials incidents. We can train for these events and offer a very professional response to these incidents. However, the event of a gas line emergency will most likely be reactive instead of proactive due to not knowing the locations of the various types of flow lines in and around the city. Mapping of these various flow lines would greatly enhance our ability to respond to these types of incidents. We need accurate flow line data that will allow for fire department pre-planning and community awareness, as this will allow for the safe mitigation of gas line emergencies. This is an issue that must be addressed and regulations implemented to provide the highest levels of public safety to the citizens in and around our city. I have spent, on a personal note, I have spent 36 years dealing with gas and oil incidents, while spending the first 25 years of my career with Mountain View Fire District, which is in both Boulder and Will counties. I saw the devastating effects when things went horribly wrong, from gas line leaks to gas line fires, condensate tanks exploding, to a well blowout, causing a high pressure release of vapor that ignited, taking the lives of 2 well workers just east of our city. I mean, like 1,000 feet outside of our city limits. So, and then lastly, prompt notification of the appropriate gas oil company is paramount, and knowing where and who the flow line belongs to, required for a timely response.
Commissioners, before we move to the next thing, that all has to do with proposed alternate language at 1101D in our pre-hearing statement.
The second issue that we'd like to speak to is number 2 in the affiliated local government's pre-hearing statement and number 9 on our amendment sheet with the other counties and cities. And this is a request for local government discretion on abandonment of lines, a topic that's come up a few times today. The proposed rules allow an operator to choose whether to abandon flow lines in place or to remove them. These decisions involve land use considerations, however, and there may be environmental or health and safety impacts that result from one option versus another. One example would be that removal of a stretch of pipeline from a sensitive wetland area might cause more damage than just abandoning it in place. It might be more disruptive to the environment, while abandonment in place in an area close to an existing or future residential development may pose greater risks that should be avoided. Consequently, the local government, with the detailed knowledge of the affected area, we feel should have the discretion to make the determination on what is most appropriate for the site-specific circumstances. Right now, the rule is silent on who makes the decision about the appropriate method for abandonment, so that means that it's probably left to the operator. We'd like local governments to have the ability to weigh in on those decisions. Also, a correction, I think there was some discussion about whether a surface owner was contacted. The current rule as proposed does not mention a surface owner being contacted at all. We've proposed alternative language to 1104, now 1105, specifying that local governments with the jurisdiction over the land where the pipeline is located should have the discretion over the selected abandonment method. The next issue is related to domestic taps. I think this one is one that we were pleased to see with the final revisions. At the September 11th, 2017 COGCC hearing, Commissioner Ager expressed concern with existing domestic taps. And so we just really thought that was an important point to continue on with. We understand that these are contracts between operators and homeowners. However, as with all of this, it's important to get a handle on where these things are. So we'd like to see domestic taps that are already existing as well as future ones be inventoried. The original language proposed registration upon installation or discovery of a domestic tap connected to an operator's flow line. The affiliated local governments offered alternative language requiring operators to provide COGCC data with locations. It looks like that concept was incorporated into the final draft, and so we'd like to see that remain as proposed. The only difference between what was proposed by COGCC and what the local government group submitted was that we asked for this to be submitted no later than 180 days after the effective date of the rules, and the final rules require it to be submitted on or before January 1st, 2019.
Good afternoon. I wanted to talk about a new section actually to 1102, I believe it's at the end, 12, I'm sorry.
And if we could have your name, please, also.
Karen Westover, County Building Director for the City of Lafayette. I want to commend you for taking a look at the flow line regulations and safety. As you know, there's been a lot of time and resources put towards this effort, and there's been some really good changes. One thing that I want to talk about, the proposal is setbacks. At the local level, we have been discussing, we've been having discussions about flow line setbacks. We're recommending that local government determine appropriate flow lines and setbacks, and flow line installation be in compliance with local setback regulations. We feel it's important to be able to review flow line siting at a local level, a more micro level. That we understand current land use patterns, planned land use patterns, also transportation and other land use issues. We feel like we can be at a local level, be more specific about locations and respond more nimbly. Local review can also take a look at efficiencies and the specific situation. So some of the local governments may not want to adopt setbacks and some may. We are specifically recommending the wording that flow lines and crude oil transfer lines must be installed in compliance with applicable local government setback requirements with respect to any surface and subsurface features. Thank you.
And then to conclude, in our pre-hearing statement, we did insert a proposed section to Rule 906, inserting pipelines and flow lines into that provision that relates to spill, contaminant, and cleanup. And then finally, two final points. One is as Kim mentioned, the affiliated local governments support the technical issues that the city and county of Broomfield have, including the integrity management, that's 1104 and 1103, leak testing, 1104, reporting and insurance provisions, 708 and 713. And we also support the local government savings clause concept, and if that finds its way into the statement and basis and does not need to be duplicative throughout this. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Commissioners? All right.
Shall I start?
Yes, ma'am. Commissioner Overturf,
All right.
please go ahead.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. I apologize in advance, but I will move through them orderlyly. So first, I'd like to talk with you about the concept of abandonment and local government having a say or having the final decision-making authority there. Can you describe the process by which you would want an operator to comply with the language that you've proposed? Does the operator seek a decision from the local government and then do what the local government requires and then file the Form 44 within 30 days of completion of that? Is that how you envision that happening?
I think that would be one way. I mean, many local governments may have their own ways to evaluate appropriate locations for a line. So we would do that through our own local review, but at a minimum, as it works with this rule, I think we would at a minimum want to be consulted.
Okay. And when you say, when you use the words at the discretion of the local government having jurisdiction over the site of the pipeline in your proposed rules, do you typically, are you referring to the county level of local government or the city or both?
Both.
Okay, so there would need to be, and what if the city and the county disagree?
It would be whoever has jurisdiction over the particular land. So in the case of unincorporated Boulder County, it would be Boulder County. Boulder would be City of Boulder, City of Lafayette, City of Longmont.
Okay, and so what would happen if there's a pipeline, or excuse me, a flow line that crosses county or jurisdictional boundaries?
I think each local jurisdiction would be have the authority for weighing in for their particular lands.
So you would say that the local government, if there's a pipeline that goes across these two pieces of paper, then local government A has control over the flow line on local government A's property, and local government B can order something different for this portion of the flow line?
I guess that would be feasible. That would be a possible situation. Hopefully, we would all be discussing these and working together to come up with the solution that worked best.
And Commissioner, just local governments between municipalities and counties, there is a tremendous amount of working together and collaboration, especially within the 3-mile area between a municipal limit and a county jurisdiction. And so you normally would find some form of IGA or something where they to sort of make sure that their decisions in these sorts of planning issues are consistent.
Okay, I think that because of the way that the rules are drafted, where there's a requirement to continue performing certain measures on that fall on the operator until the abandonment is final, my concern is that wanting to make sure that that process is as efficient as possible and that it doesn't take a year for the affected local governments to come to an agreement about what should happen to a particular flow line. So if there's, can you address that? I mean, what sort of timeline do you feel like the local governments would need to be able to make that determination?
I don't know that I can give you a standard timeline. I mean, I think we'd need to visit the site, evaluate what the impacts are, but I don't see it being a year-long process or anything significant. It's really being able to weigh in on the process of whether we think that's the appropriate method.
Method to accommodate that. I mean, again, what we're trying to do is help influence your regulations that are applicable to all local governments. So we try to do it in a manner that allows for, many local governments aren't going to be in this game, frankly. And so for those that are there, we wanted to have some generic language on that. So yeah, I mean, as Kim said.
Okay. You in your presentation here today, you said that the reason why the COGCC should host the mapping
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Commissioner Overturk, but I'm just wondering if we should handle this by subject matter or by.
Sure, if you'd rather do it that way, that's fine.
This issue of abandonment in place raises a lot of questions, and I'm wondering whether we should explore that fully first before going on to mapping and the others. I'm happy to defer to whatever your preference is.
Perhaps that might be more appropriate if that's all right. If we can.
That's fine.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So you have questions about?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair.
Right.
Thank you. If it's okay with.
So we'll start with abandonment in place, and then we'll move on to whatever's next at Commissioner Overturk's discretion.
Great. And with knowledge that we can't, I don't want to prolong this and keep Mr. Robbins from watching his alma mater play tonight for the national championship. So I'll try to keep this brief without giving away who you're rooting for. Go Dogs, right?
I got the hat.
So on this abandonment in place issue, I'd like to pursue these questions a little bit. You said, Ms. Sanchez, that it would be the operator under the proposed rules, it'd be the operator who would have the call. And yet surface owners also have a significant role to play. You recognize that, correct? And that there's usually an agreement between the operator and the surface owner on how to handle flow lines and other kinds of structures in place. So would you be asking for a rule that would give local governments primacy over agreements between operators and surface owners?
I mean, it's our practice, and maybe I should have been explicit about that, but it would be our practice to talk to the property owner about what we think the recommended method would be for that particular site. We've had this come up in one situation in Boulder County, and it was a pipeline that was going through a floodplain in a wetland area. And as it turned out, it was going to be so much more disruptive to dig in and trench and remove that pipeline rather than just abandon it in place and fill it with cement and make sure that it was safe. So I think that's why we wanted the ability to be able to weigh in a particular situation like this.
But if a surface owner on just normal dry ground had an agreement with an operator that the lines that the operator installs would be abandoned in place when the operator was through with them, would you want the authority to override that if you thought that it might be an impediment to development down the line to have those lines there?
I think we would want that authority, but I think we would try to work with the property owner to come to the best agreement that works for all parties.
And do you think the commission could even grant you authority to do that?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, Commissioner Morgan, is that I don't believe the commission wants or has the authority to grant or authority to local governments. And so whether and to what extent that authority exists in the hypothetical that you address, that would be something that is dealt with at the local government and the surface owner who, if the planning department is saying you've got to do it by taking it out and they want it in, that usually would find its way to the elected officials in that community.
Which leads me, thank you, which leads me really to my point, which is that, well, I'll put it in the form of a question. Does the commission have any authority to make a decision in this context as to whether the extent to which local governments can regulate, can require abandonment in place, for example, as opposed to it being a matter between the operator and the surface owner and the relevant property owners subject to regulatory jurisdiction to make sure it's done in a safe and appropriate manner?
And I think what the affiliated governments was trying to do is that this is an item that is very important from a planning perspective. They're going to be doing it. And so we thought that it might make sense for your regulations to recognize that at least some governments are going to do that.
So what if, for example, if we were to say in the rule that the operator would be required to give notice to a local government and to consult, like the rules already provide 306, 305, 303, that would be, would that be helpful?
Yes, I think it would. I think as contemplated, the way that the local government receives notice is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's like after the fact. And so if there is a provision within your rule, and I'd be happy to draft something this evening right after the game is over, and provide it to you tomorrow.
Too depressed.
Yeah.
Or too
but
drug rate.
The concept of notice that is anticipatory before the action is taken would then allow a local government that is in this game to exercise their jurisdiction over the issue.
Right. There's clearly a jurisdictional question here and a property rights issue, et cetera, which we can't resolve, I don't think.
But providing notice to the local government, anticipatory of doing it, allows that government to address the issue if they so desire.
To weigh in.
And you're not making a determination on whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise at that point, at least I don't think.
Right, and that may be, and I'd want to get staff's view on that, and of course we'll hear industry's response to that as whether that's feasible. And I guess the other question I would have then is if the local government were to be making these decisions, would they be taking into account the cost to the operator and the burden of the removal process in comparison to the benefits of leaving it in place from the viewpoint of the operator and of the property owner for that matter, or would the local government be looking at it strictly from what it thinks is best for, in your case, the County of Boulder?
I think our practice is to look at what the impacts are, and then secondary to those would be looking at sort of the costs But, I think our priority has always been, at least speaking for Boulder County, or what are the impacts to, the floodplain, the wetland, the environment going to be, and then we'll also account for other factors that may come into play.
Such as, for example, the possibility of future development of that site. Okay.
Commissioner Boyd, may I ask just one follow-up question on that, related to that?
You may, I would like to get a time check from Ms. Prine. What else do we have left today? And keeping in mind that we do have to be out of here, I believe, by 5 p.m.
By 5, yeah.
Yeah.
So City and County of Broomfield has 27 minutes. That is not including question and answer. It is 10 after 4 right now.
All right, so I think if we can consolidate questions as best as we can here, that would be great.
Yes, I'm a little bit confused about what the affiliated local government's proposal actually is with regard to abandonment, because what I hear you saying here today is that you want notice of an abandonment and you want an opportunity to weigh in. But the red line rules that you proposed said, at the discretion of the local government having jurisdiction over the site of the pipeline, the operator shall ... So do you want to make the decision, or do you want notice and an opportunity to weigh in?
As we just discussed with Commissioner Boygan, I would like to prepare proposed alternate language that speaks more to notice. And as long as the commission is not making the call that it has to be abandoned or removed, then for those local governments that would be involved in doing that, the notice would give them the opportunity to work with the operator to, make the call about, how the abandonment takes place, along with information from the surface owner.
And there were a number of other parties that deferred to you on this issue of abandonment. So are they in agreement with the alternate that you're?
I think the discretionary language came from Boulder County, and other local governments were more interested in being able to weigh in. So I think that would be a change that would be acceptable to the other local governments that we've been in consultation with.
Okay, thank you.
Other local governments in the room, hold up your hand if you disagree.
They might not be here.
They're already.
But what we can do is we can check,
That'd be great.
and we can provide that to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
There may be other Georgia or Alabama fans that have gone to go watch the game. All right, on to the next item on your list,
All right.
please.
Mapping. So a lot of your discussion here today talked about how there's a need for this specific information in order to do the various vital services that you each do for your communities. And that in the absence of this type of information, you can't perform to the level that you feel like you need to. My question is that even if we were to adopt your proposal, you would not have this type of detailed information for other types of pipelines that the COGCC doesn't regulate. And so even if we do what you want, aren't you still in a bad place? And can you explain why partial information works in this instance? Because it seems like you would need all of it based on the arguments that you've made here today.
The answer to having a complete data set is yes. I would want it all.
But we can't do that, right?
I hear that.
Okay.
So I define success not at 100%. I'll say 10%. And that's how you reduce vulnerabilities in communities. You start attacking things with the information that you can't get access to. And there would be other needs around the pipeline as a whole, large transmission and the gathering lines, and those would be things I'd be looking to build also with industry too.
And are you seeking this type of information from other agencies that regulate these other types of pipelines?
At this time, no. I'm starting the journey. This started for me in emergency management in mid-2017. And like I said earlier in the testimony, was that the expectations of the communities they want to know. And they're coming to the emergency management agency on the local emergency planning commission share, which deals with regulation of hazardous materials and community right to know law. And I'm tasked with finding this information out based around the community's expectation. I have it, and I don't.
If Form 44s were required to contain GIS information for all Form 44s, that good enough?
Well, the question of the forms and the process, the thing is, I go ask people for the information, I can't get it. So.
But here but here, what I'm saying is, we would have all these Form 44s, they would be provided to the commission. Currently, GIS information is not required for each and every Form 44.
Correct.
What I'm wondering is, if you had each of those Form 44s, you could put that together to create your map.
Correct.
Is that sufficient?
Preliminarily, that would be helpful, very helpful. I'd say it would be all encompassing on the data set I would need related to community safety. I want this testimony to say that would be firm. I want to look at that, review it before giving the final answer. But yes, having that database, being able to get access to it, having our GIS personnel be able to turn it into layers of like mapping for hazard, very helpful.
Okay. And just one more question on this topic. I think we've had a lot of conversation today about how this is something new. There aren't any other oil and gas regulators that have required mapping for flow lines. And so my question to you is, why should this commission do something that no other commission has done? Why is Colorado different?
Well, that's from the emergency management perspective. When we talk about dealing with disasters, and I can tell you this right now, in our county, we've had quite a number of them. And my job is to get everyone to think around the worst day of their life when it's blue skies. And that's a hard thing to sell to people. But when they do experience a problem, or they experience a loss, or they feel that their safety or their vulnerability is exposed, people are motivated now to take action and to know more they demand. So to say that just because no one else does it, we shouldn't do it either. I don't know if that premise works well when it comes to public safety. The fact is that the answer to any type of vulnerability in a community, it's a mesh network of resilience that has to be created. And that means the responsibility of who's going to contribute to helping create that is going to be quite broad. That net is going to be thrown. There will be many people, many organizations that will have to have a contributing element in creating that. That's it, that net of resiliency or response or preparedness. And it begins with somebody. And it began with me, with my community. So that's why I'm here before you today. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd like to see the courage from this committee to take the action to help me to be executive commissioner of emergency management within Boulder County, and I know would be applicable across the state.
All right.
I'm done.
You're done? Gosh. Gives me a chance to ask a quick question. So what I heard Ms. Sanchez say is that you were looking for a searchable GIS database of flow lines that you could put on a map. And to what level of detail would you like that to be? So, you know, we're close to Christmas, so.
I think those details could be worked out. Just the acknowledgement that this is information that local governments want and could utilize for planning and for the reasons that we've noted is a first step. And then I think we could look to see what level of detail we actually needed. But being able to see where these pipelines are is a basic ask.
Sir, if I could, on
Certainly.
public safety standpoint, more accurate and more precise. So when I come from a 27-year first responder background, 18 years, but on a hazmat team, and the information you have going in for training, planning, and response, more accurate, more precise, the quicker the response, and then you can also assist greatly with public warning and impacts of, on evacuation of property and infrastructure.
Okay. Director Laporte, you have something? Yeah.
I think I do. And I think you just started to sneak up on it, but I mean, I think I'm asking this out of, a very low level of knowledge here. Okay. So bear with me, but for your purposes, for the emergency planning that you do, could you help me understand the benefit of the mapping? And you just said something about perhaps evacuation. So maybe that's part of it, but I guess I'm just curious how having a map of potentially a great number of flow lines works for you.
allow us to plan better with our response plans. Evacuations, we talked about that. Exposure risks, health and property both. And then there's the issue of traffic. If you have a large mass events, regarding traffic. So those things would be nice to do in front. Proactive, so that, like I said earlier. Those are kind of some of the things that get out of having that.
So may I have one follow-up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you may.
So the follow-up is, to what extent do you have similar detailed information from other kind of hazards, especially other subsurface pipeline hazards? I mean, obviously, other utility pipelines, water pipelines, et cetera.
Well, we can see it above ground.
Well, I don't mean above ground. I mean, you have below ground
Right.
infrastructure for natural gas, utility, natural gas, water lines, that kind of thing. So you have detailed information, maps, that kind of thing for other hazards like that.
Not for residential commercial properties as far as gas lines go.
Yeah.
As far as commercial and residential properties go, we have that.
And we do have the water mapping done. Water lines.
Go ahead, Commissioner Jolly.
I have a question and a comment. My question is, well, my comment is, I don't know how much staff has interacted with 811, but as Ms. Sanchez mentioned, I think it would be helpful in my mind to see what they think, if there's some representative that could.
I think we're working on that one.
And my question is this, on the setbacks, do you have an idea of what a setback would be for a flow line? Any of you guys?
Well, we've just kind of started the discussions on them, and whether it's a large, one size fits all, we're kind of coming away from that as far as a specific distance, but we would start with the minimum, being able to look at it and on the impacts and how that's addressed. I think that's kind of where our discussions are going right now, rather than a one size fits all. This is perfect size. I think it might depend on the situation. We could set some benefits here. So we're really in kind of initial discussions about that.
The impacts to who?
To future development, or, you know, if there were hazards or something that would happen with the flow lines. So, you know, from residential, I think we want to look at setbacks from that, from natural environmental impacts.
Thank you. I did have a question that goes back again to the mapping. When we first started this proceeding this morning, Mr. Ellsworth presented a couple of maps, which I would anticipate that would be your expectation for what would be in the Form 44. Is that correct?
As far as the layout is.
So my recollection on that showed the location of the line. So would that, what I'm struggling with is, why would that be insufficient? Because it pretty much says, here's the county road, this flow line is on the north side of the county road. And I believe we have to provide specifications around size of the line, operating pressure, that sort of thing. So what's missing?
I don't know what map you're referring to in particular. I apologize, Commissioner Benton. What I do remember is from the working group meeting that was held a couple days ago, whenever that was, there was a map that was showing lines that were not under your jurisdiction. And then when it came to the lines that we were talking about that are subject to this rulemaking, they went away. And so we, and that's my recollection of it. If that's incorrect, then
I would suggest to go back and take a look at that document, because it was pretty clear. I think Mr. Ellsworth put out two examples of what we would expect for flow lines and what would be expected to be followed with a Form 44. So you may want to take a look at that.
okay, thank you.
It's one of them.
If I may, I think
Certainly,
I
Mr. Overturf.
recall what you're referring to, and that was actually an example of an online map that's available of PHMSA regulated pipelines, as I understand it. And where it blurred out was when you got close enough to be able to identify the actual specific location. And that's because of security concerns related to those PHMSA regulated pipelines, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Okay, and I think what we're looking for are locations that we can incorporate into our GIS systems to use for the reasons that we've explained in our testimony.
But I would, again, just say, take a look at that, because it's, I mean, I worked off of some maps that have been provided to us by some third-party gas transmission companies that were of less detail than that to create a GIS map. So
well, I think I'm also looking at just the language in the rules themselves, which really only speak to registering start and end points, and then also speak to, you know, this concept of a recorded easement. And that is not what we are seeking as a comprehensive mapping.
So the language also says a layout drawing of the flow line associated oil and gas locations and existing and proposed pipelines related to the oil and gas locations.
Correct, and there seemed to be some confusion and question over what the layout
So again, I would
actually
suggest, please take a look at what they provided for an example and see if that would work for you.
And I'm suggesting that it's not crystal clear to us, so we're happy to take a look at that.
That would be great.
The rules are not crystal clear,
Thank
so
you.
that we have an understanding of what that is.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, yes, Commissioner Agar.
I would just ask staff to remind me what planning looks like for flow lines, and if we talk about setbacks at all during the planning process, Form 2A. Is this the first time we've talked about setbacks for flow lines?
Yeah, I'll ask staff to correct me if I misstate, but there are no setback requirements for flow lines right now, and we have not contemplated requiring setbacks as I understand that term.
And I would just offer,
Commissioner
Mr.
Boyd.
Chair, there's a preemption issue here if we're going to get into the issue of local governments imposing setbacks. And we can have that discussion tomorrow.
I think that gets a little lengthy, and I think there's nothing else for these folks. We should continue on, and thank you all. And thank you. I don't have a dog in this hunt tonight, so good luck to your team.
No pun intended.
Unintended. Yes, Director Lepore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subject to Commission's wishes, we have been in touch with 811, and they are happy to come in tomorrow and explain for the Commission in greater detail and respond to questions about how 811 works. So if that is something that the Commission feels would be beneficial, we can have them here, and maybe we do that first thing in the morning before industry gets rolling, or whatever schedule you desire.
I think I would like to have that, but I'll defer to the rest of you. What would you think? Like to have that first thing in the morning? Okay, and we start again at 8:30 tomorrow? Okay, 8:30 tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much. We'll ask them to do that.
So I think we're, Broomfield is next.
So that means we just miss lunch tomorrow, is that it?
I'm sorry?
No lunch tomorrow, or we just eat while we're working?
It all depends on how many questions you have, Commissioner.
Touche.
Good
Okay,
afternoon,
go ahead.
Commissioners. Thank you so much for still taking the time. I'm Elizabeth Pranos, outside counsel for the City and County of Broomfield. Just one thing before we start, we do have a PowerPoint. I wasn't sure how that would be operated. Looks like he's pulling it up. Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, we may need to do a little tweaking with the lights back there so that we can actually see it.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. Okay. Okay.
So right now it's a bit washed out.
Well, before we get that going, I'll just introduce that I have also with me today Tammy Yellico, who is the local government designee for the City and County of Broomfield, as well as the Director of Strategic Initiatives. And I also have Jeff Bybee, who's the Deputy Chief of Operations with the North Metro Fire and Rescue District. And we are reserving time for a response statement and cross-examination.
And so,
Yes.
no, this is not a question for you because you're still working on it. How much time did the affiliated governments have left? for tomorrow? Because I know they asked for, I believe, 8 minutes, was it?
8 minutes and 16 seconds.
Boy, they are good. Right on.
I'm not sure, maybe. I'll just start. Well, we don't need this up quite yet, so I'll start, and that way I'll try to do this while Tammy's talking.
Okay.
So Broomfield has asked for a number of improvements to the staff's final proposal that are intended to enhance the protectiveness of the rules and ensure that local governments receive information that is critically necessary to keep their citizens informed and safe. These are numbers 2, 3, 5, and 6 on the outline of local government issues that Kim noted previously. Based on the updates to the rule and testimony from earlier today, we have modified some of our suggested proposals, and we'll go through that today with the PowerPoint. We also support the recommended changes made to the staff's proposal by the affiliated local governments, the savings clause proposed by Northwest COG, as well as the testimony provided by Adams County earlier today. To briefly recap our current recommendations, we have requested that operators notify the local government designee of certain events and releases that require our first responders or involve information that is critically necessary for our inspector to do his job, and for local governments to respond to inquiries from concerned citizens about oil and gas activities occurring near their homes and businesses. Second, we have suggested improvements to the pipeline integrity management provisions in order to ensure that operators use at least 2 technology-based methods to identify pipeline anomalies and to ensure that small leaks and the early stages of corrosion are detected expeditiously before they can grow into large, more significant problems. Audio, visual, olfactory, in our opinion, is not a sufficient method for pipelines. We have suggested modifications that require that operators use modern leak detection equipment when conducting visual inspections of above-ground gas lines and prohibit the use of AVO as the sole detection method for any pipeline. Third, we've suggested additional monitoring requirements to ensure, this one I believe has been resolved by staff. This was corrosion monitoring requirements that in fact we've discussed with staff. Their most recent proposal does address, so I don't need to discuss those now, fortunately. Fourth, we urge the commission to increase the amount of general liability insurance that each operator must carry and to require operators carry environmental liability insurance in order to cover environmental damage, such as can be caused by pipeline leaks or spills. I'm now going to ask Tammy Yellico to please speak.
Thank you, Commissioners. I need to push this here. Thank you very much, Commissioners. I've been before you recently, and you have come to Broomfield, and I want to thank you for both of those efforts on your part. Your outreach to local governments is really important. It has, I think, helped local governments to coalesce and to meet more frequently with each other. And so I'm not just saying this to be pandering in any way. I'm saying this because I sincerely believe that your outreach to local governments is very important, and we definitely appreciate that. As you know, Broomfield has been at the center of a very long and at times passionate discussion regarding the nature and impact of oil and gas on our communities. And over the last 2 years, we have held hundreds of public meetings, and that's not an overstatement, and we've received about as many written comments. The majority of these have been grave concerns about the risk of public health. In response to this, as you know, the Broomfield City Council created an oil and gas comprehensive committee. They had 10 recommendations to you when you came there for rules that should be made. And we're very happy that you were making these flow line rules today, as that was one of the items that was on their list, was flow making rules. In addition, since then, over 11,000 Broomfield citizens voted in November for the city and county to use all of its powers to protect the public health, safety, and welfare environment of its citizens, as those may be impacted by oil and gas development. So the city council is left with a task of interpreting that charter amendment. And part of that is to come to rulemaking hearings such as this one and to pursue legal means of making rules that help our citizens. So one of the areas that the Oil and Gas Comprehensive Plan Committee focused on was pipelines, leaks, and spills, and specifically requested that the city require continuous leak monitoring or a combination of annual pressure testing and other forms of testing or monitoring capable of detecting small or intermittent leaks. Other comments concerning the minimum insurance requirement contained in the COGCC rules were that the committee noted a need for higher general liability insurance and some environmental liability insurance requirement for operators. Now I must talk to you just briefly about the extraction operating agreement. Per this operating agreement with Extraction has agreed to conduct annual pressure testing. Extraction has agreed to smart pigging every 5 years. Extraction has agreed to leak detection and aerial surveys at least twice a year. Extraction has agreed to carry general liability insurance with limits not less than $100 million. And Extraction has agreed to environmental liability insurance with limits not less than $5 million per pollution events. This extraction agreement is, we believe, proof positive or confirmation that our proposals to you today for integrity management and insurance provisions are based on achievable goals and in goals that should be in the regulations for operators, even if variance requirements must be included. We think most operators can meet all of the integrity management provisions that we are recommending to you today. Our Oil and Gas Comprehensive Plan Committee definitely asked us to promote continuous monitoring or other technology for pipelines. And another issue is, of course, the insurance requirements. This rule talks about bonding, but it makes no mention of insurance requirements. And as I mentioned, we are hoping for general liability insurance requirements as well as environmental liability insurance requirements. One thing that has come up today that is important to Broomfield is notice of as-built. When operators come in, they know exactly, as we have learned from Extraction, and we continue to learn through their 6 sites in Broomfield, they know where they're going to put their flow lines. And these as-builts are very important to our emergency providers, and we believe that these should be given directly to the local government designees so that we can share those appropriately with our emergency responders. We believe this lends to transparency, it lends to preparedness, it lends itself to training, and it lends itself to a timely response time. So the notice provision that was discussed here today is important to us also. So once again, I end with a resounding thank you for your outreach to local governments, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, we now have the PowerPoint up there. The PowerPoint contains our red lines to the final draft rules, other than the red line that was provided earlier today to test to parties. So the first one that I want to go over are some changes to the advanced notification and reporting requirements. As we noted, we are requesting advanced notification of pressure tests, leak inspections, and repairs and routine maintenance that involves construction or venting. Our oil and gas inspector has requested these advanced notifications because he, in the past, has heard complaints from local citizens about construction activities or venting that's occurring within the jurisdiction of Broomfield, and he was unable to respond to them because he did not know that these things were occurring. In addition, we would like notification of pressure tests and leak inspections so that our oil and gas inspector can oversee such tests when he goes out there. We're also requesting that operators report the following events to us: results of failed pressure tests, leaks or other integrity problems identified during leak inspections, repairs or remediation efforts taken in response to spills or releases, grade 1 gas leaks, and reportable safety events. These types of information contain critical information that is important and necessary to the ability of local governments to protect public health and the environment. I'd now like to have Jeff Bybee speak about the importance of some of these reporting requirements.
Thank you. Good late afternoon this morning. I prepared a short statement that kind of goes along those lines of describing the importance to first responders of this direct and timely notification for both high acuity events and low acuity events from the operator, the local government, and first responders. Again, I'm the operations chief for North Metro Fire Rescue. North Metro Fire provides emergency response to the city and county of Broomfield, city of Northland, and unincorporated areas of Adams, Jefferson, and Weld counties. As a special district fire department, we respond to a wide range of emergencies that can arise from gas and oil exploration and production, including fires, explosions, chemical releases and spills, injuries, and gas leaks. We are alerted of such incidents when operators, bystanders, or nearby residents dial 911. Receiving notification immediately for injuries or accidents that require quick intervention to minimize further damage is of obvious importance. In nearly every instance, prompt and effective response is the most significant factor in curtailing damage. It is also essential that we receive accurate information about the nature of the event, such as liquid, gas, or chemical involved, nature of injury, extent of damage, etc., so that we may send the appropriate personnel and equipment. For less time-sensitive events, the reporting of lower acuity events within 24 hours would allow us to work with operators and our partners in local government to identify problems or trends that could lead to more serious accidents down the road. It is my belief that receiving notifications directly from the operator, not from the COGCC, would not only expedite the sharing of important information impacting community safety, it would emphasize the shared responsibility we all have, operators, first responders, and local government, to make these operations as safe as possible.
Thank you. I'm now going to discuss our proposal for integrity management. So basically we have two overall suggestions. One is that operators need to use at least one technology-based form of leak detection or pressure or monitoring to inspect for leaks. Simply using AVO, even if it's monthly, is not sufficient. The fact that the definition of AVO includes things like infrared cameras is not sufficient either, because AVO, under the current definition, still allows for just audiovisual olfactory. So for dump lines in particular, buried dump lines, we believe the only option should be a static head test, not monthly AVO. For all of the other lines, the on-location, off-location, and the crude oil transfer lines, our proposal is that operators use more than one form of testing that's technology-based. So that could be a combination of continuous pressure monitoring, annual pressure testing, triennial smart pigging, or for above ground natural gas flow lines, a visual inspection using technology. That is what CDPHE requires for above ground pipe flow lines at a well site or at a gas compressor station. AVO is only allowed as a supplementary method under CDPHE rules. Gary Kaufman, the director of the Air Pollution Control Division, submitted a letter to the commissioners that voiced similar concerns about AVO. Per Mr. Kaufman's letter, he said, I quote, "The division has found that optical gas imaging identifies far more leaks than audio, visual, and olfactory inspections. While the division uses handheld infrared cameras, newer technologies are in use, including airborne and vehicle-mounted sensors. The division anticipates that detection methods and technologies will continue to improve and costs will continue to decline." I would also note that the PHMSA rules for transmission lines that carry unodorized gas require that the leakage surveys be conducted with leak detection equipment. And the PHMSA rules for distribution gas pipelines also require that operators use leak detection equipment. Simply looking for a gas leak is not sufficient with the naked eye. Lastly, the PUC rules for intrastate natural gas gathering lines in certain class locations, specifically 2 through 4, where there are at least 10 dwellings within 200 yards, I believe, or 200 yards of the pipeline segment. Also, operators need to use leak detection equipment when inspecting for leaks. Lastly, as Tammy mentioned, our proposal, in line with what Extraction has agreed to in the MOU, would increase the general liability limits to $5 million per each and every occurrence. And we have requested that the COGCC add an environmental liability insurance to cover pollution from pollution events such as spills and releases. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I was taking notes. Any commissioner questions? Commissioner Boygan.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to ask staff to respond, to comment on these requests, especially on eliminating ABO and
Well, I think it's important to realize what we've proposed here is various different types of equipment and different types of pipelines, whether they're on location or off location, and the protocols within the integrity program we presented are very based on their uses. So that's incorporated within our rules, and we're focusing on the integrity perspective. The CDPHE is focused on, in their Reg 7, is focused on an emissions scenario. So in our rules, we in what we propose, we do realize that that is an embedded part of another state agency's role. And so we're focused on the or the integrity perspective of things. And that's why we created some of our perspectives.
So more preventative, I guess, with what I heard. Okay.
I have a question, but are we there?
Is that all right?
No, sure.
Commissioner Overturf.
My question was in regard to your the insurance provisions that you recommend, and I'm wondering for both the general liability insurance and the environmental liability insurance, you advocate for a $5 million coverage, and I'm wondering how you arrived at that value and what's the basis for $5 million.
We did hire a consultant to look at those insurance amounts, and in fact, that consultant came back with much higher amounts, $100 million for each of those. So we are shooting for a lower amount so that there is some insurance coverage in both of those areas, general liability and environmental liability. We hired Charles Taylor Company for our oil and gas comprehensive plan committee. We have that report, and that report suggests much higher amounts of insurance should be in place.
Thank you. That's all I had.
Mr. Boygan.
Well, I'll just follow up on that. So what's the regulatory gap that environmental insurance would fill? Are you worried about the operator that goes out of business? Is that your primary concern? Because otherwise, the rules would require it's an event that has a release to clean up, remediate, pay for whatever damage is caused. And then there are separate financial assurance requirements which address liability issues or failure to comply with commission rules. But so are you mostly concerned about operators that just don't have the resources to comply?
I think that's it in part. And the other thing is there's a big difference between contract provision that says we will pay for everything, and we're responsible for everything, and having that backed up by an insurance policy that covers those concerns.
Well, yes, and there's also a difference between insurance policies and surety bonds. Surety bonds are directed specifically toward, let's say, a governmental entity and can be drawn by that entity. Insurance policies are subject to all kinds of exclusions, deductibles, exceptions, carve-outs, notice requirement. I mean, it's not ironclad, but I get your point. It's an additional deep pocket back up, right. Which takes me back to my question: is your primary concern those operators who just don't respond, either because they can't or they go out of business, or they deny I mean, if they deny liability, then insurance doesn't help you. You still got to litigate that.
That's true. I think our primary concern is that, there's something in place other than the word of a company, the word of an Anadarko, the word of anyone, right?
Okay.
And I think insurance policies, in our experience, have been easier to collect on, if you will, than some types of bonds.
Okay, maybe so. They also have an expense, and they may or may not be available. So I'm just probing. I mean, financial assurance is clearly an issue that we're focused on, and staff has proposed some changes to Rule 711 to deal with that. And certainly industry is going to respond to this tomorrow. I just want to understand what environmental liability insurance specifically brings to the table. Other than a generalized, we want some insurance in place, it's something is better than nothing.
I mean, I guess I would just add that I think one of the concerns is that the rules already do require general liability insurance, but there is no provision for environmental liability insurance. So while there are bonding provisions, there is no insurance that would cover a pollution event like a spill that impacted a reservoir, for example. And the bonds may or may not be sufficient. The amounts of the bonds, at least in the rules, don't go up to $5 million. So I think we did see a gap there with respect to both the type of insurance that is required, the general liability, but not the environmental. And in addition, the caps or the minimum amounts rather required in the bonding provisions versus what we've requested in the insurance provisions.
That's exactly right, because we're seeing well sites that are near our drinking water reservoirs. They're large well sites. Issues can happen.
So it's almost what I'm hearing out of this is that the company would carry the policy and then they would admit to some environmental issue, but this would be supplemental coverage to what they would agree to clean up anyway. So a company may decide to sell, if it's Anadarko, for example, they say, well, we'll self-insure up to that amount. Something along that line, but say it's a smaller operator, they may go take out a policy to essentially cover themselves in the event that something happens. I guess that's the only thing I can see the reason. Otherwise, if you deny it, well, then the policy is worthless. They deny any liability.
No doubt that some of these policies have fairly high deductibles, so that's made for us.
Okay.
And it assumes the insurance is available.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
This is for staff, and maybe I'm looking for the director's input here. But a lot of information about notifications here. And one of your earlier statements when we started today was it's the future working with local governments. That's where we need to go. And it seems to me that we've made a lot of progress with that with planning and before you drill. But these proposals are getting into the nitty-gritty of daily operations and being notified of pressure tests and pressure test results. And what would be your opinion on that? How does that work when we start getting into the second phase of this, away from the planning and more to day-to-day operations? And Broomfield has an inspector, an oil and gas inspector, who wants to be able to talk to their constituents about these day-to-day operations, and how is that going to look?
Thank you, Commissioner. A great question. I want to start at kind of a micro level, I guess. Earlier drafts of the rules had operators providing advance notice to the COGCC about their pressure tests. And when we started to appreciate the volume of notices that would entail, we decided to go a different direction, because I don't think we can effectively manage all the notices that we're going to get. And it becomes kind of a fruitless exercise at that point. So we flipped to sort of the spot checking, the on-demand, that will give us the ability to say to an operator, hey, we want to come see what pressure testing either you're going to do today or tomorrow or next week, or we want you to test specific flow lines for us while we're there. We just feel in terms of resources, our own resources, it's a much more efficient and effective way than to get noticed of every single pressure test that operators are conducting. I mean, the feedback to us from the industry, and industry can address this tomorrow as well, is that they're pressure testing something like pretty much every single day of the week, the bigger operators. Bigger picture, I think we still have to navigate this a little bit. I mean, I think it's interesting that Broomfield has an oil and gas inspector. You know, our position historically has been a local government inspector can inspect for things that pertain to the local government ordinances, which might be building codes and things like that. They cannot inspect for compliance with our rules. Now, there's probably a middle ground there where they can say, you know, we're pretty familiar with the commission rules and it looks to us like something is amiss here. And I think we would respect that. I mean, there's been back and forth about local government inspectors. We've had good experiences, we've had not so good experiences. And it comes down in part to how familiar with our rules are they, and how familiar with oil and gas operations are they really. But, you know, you work through those things and a local government inspector says to us, something looks amiss. I think we're going to respond to that and get on it and go find something out. So I don't know. I don't, it's hard for me to directly answer the question. That's why I think it's a challenging question that we're working towards, you know, kind of the balance on.
Quickly, please.
I will quickly follow up and say that we've had 2 or 3 incidents that it has been our inspector or our citizen that has called to our attention. We've immediately called the COGCC. They have been very responsive. They've been out the same day, and they were in fact violations of regulations. And I think maybe only one was one of a dangerous manner. So oftentimes you're looking at the folks, and particularly our inspector, who are boots on the ground, who see things and get the first call from citizens. If the operator is not out on an older site 24 hours a day. So it is an important issue.
And I think that is, it's somebody else's eyes and ears, and it's exactly what the director said. And it's, I think I'd say there'd have to say there's a fair amount of appreciation on this side as well. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Tammy has said, Ms. Yellico has said, and it brings to mind someone like Kirby Wynn out in Garfield County who, you know, we have a long, good, productive relationship with for the most part. Nothing's perfect, but you know, he he does a good job of fielding citizen complaints, responding to those citizen complaints, addressing them to the extent that he can and so forth. But at the same time, there's a provision in the statute that says we cannot delegate enforcement authority to any other entity. So correct. We got to, that's another part of the balance.
We have 4 minutes left.
All right, I'll just 2 quick comments. One is, to me, it's a question of administrative burden, and I'd like to hear industry speak to that as well as staff. I mean, you've already said you don't want the notices. I heard Weld County say this morning they don't want them. So if Broomfield wants them, what should be a process for accommodating a jurisdiction that says it wants them? Maybe that's so discreet and contained and small in number that it's okay, but maybe more jurisdictions would want them. Again, I guess I'd just like to hear industry speak to that point.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else?
I have a housekeeping matter. Ms. Bryan or whoever, are we allowed to leave stuff in the room, both the commissioners and the parties, or should we take everything with us?
I did not get any information one way or the other, so my recommendation would be to take your stuff.
Okay.
All right. I think council has said that we should entertain a motion to adjourn until 8:30 tomorrow morning.
So moved.
Second.
So moved by Commissioner Hawkins, seconded by Commissioner Ager. Any discussion? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We'll see you all tomorrow at 8:30.